Yeah, that's what, yeah.
But the whole,
Right, but it's not here. She didn't put it.
I know last week she was like, she would count. Oh, wow. Yes. I
Steve, after the press college.
and we
Okay, so any issues or questions with the last module? Yeah.
I got a bone to pick.
Okay.
Made our blog public, he said. Nobody will find us.
Oh,
he
you're
said.
kidding.
Someone.
Beacon News asked to publish my blog
That's
in
a good
their
thing.
blog. No, it's not, because I talk about how horrible I've been teaching for 8 years.
Okay.
Publish that on that.
Oh, that lady from the board.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
The Beacon News, Joy Davis, she publishes
What is the
a
Beacon News?
feature
What is the
called
Beacon
Blog
News?
Blog. It's a newspaper in Aurora, Fox Valley.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Oh my God, what are the chances of that?
He's
No, because I thought it was mine.
But it's not so great, and she had to ask for permission. You
Yeah,
just
she
say
had to
no.
ask for permission, I told her no, but,
Say it's for class.
yeah, it's for.
All right. So let's. How can we?
I added you, so I put it on private, but added michael.mandarino@gmail.com, but you also have to change it to take it off of being able to search on search engines and on Blogger.
I think I heard that.
Okay.
So, I was honored, and I was,
He is too.
Right.
but,
She's like, and I'm terrified.
yes.
Why don't we do this? Can you? I don't have any paper. Can someone start a piece of paper and write your Gmail address down? And then that way, if people are still, we can.
We should just put it in.
You'll have. I'll type it up.
somebody to say you're.
I'll post it, and you will. But you are going to have to manually enter everyone's Gmail to share your blog. That's my only.
I mean, if anybody else wants to share theirs, I'll direct her your way, but.
How the heck did you
I.
troll
Well,
blogs?
you know what? Last night when
Also check the
Beyonce
search.
like Googled her and looked at the most random blogs that she features, and he goes, she just trolls for. That's exactly what he said. Keywords, or.
Did you use St. Charles North in there? I have a question about this. Is it across or up and down? Across.
Yeah.
So, I was flattered, I was scared at the same time.
Okay.
So, I already made it private, but I added you.
Okay. Well, at minimum, we're gonna have to add your.
Everybody else.
Okay. Who started it? It started, so it'll come around and write your Gmail so we can share it. Okay. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Not anticipate that.
Well, and I'm like, how do you even understand, because I'm referring to the PowerPoint from class, and like, it could not have made any sense to her.
No, she's just looking at if you're an educator problem. So.
Educator, like bad educator. Fire educators.
No. Other thoughts, questions? I got really behind this week. Tonight, Module 3 will be up. I promise. What needs to happen? It's not there right now. I realize that. I will finalize that and push that up. The other thing is, I know people who weren't here were tuned into the fact that I'm recording class. But if you ever wanted to go back to something, then of course, I'm just going to keep doing this. It seems to work. I talk loud enough, I suppose. And you can fast forward through the group time stuff. I'll just keep posting the videos it's videos, it's that, and my voice. And put that up there, so that you can have that as a reference. Anything else for the health and welfare of our group? Yeah.
Quick question, and I know that you've talked about this and you might even reiterate it tonight, but when we write down the names of the other blogs that we're looking at, are we responding to each of them, or are those just the ones that we're looking at when all of them are posted?
Those are just the ones I would like you to to provide some feedback, comment on.
Okay, just like.
You're free to look at anyone. I mean,
Right.
the goal is that if something struck your fancy, that you would be able to, but just that everyone has at least 2 or 3 people interacting with them.
Okay,
That's it.
and you don't want anything necessarily.
No.
Okay, thanks.
Or
Any-
respond to maybe pulling in things that we've read about and things like that, or what we're doing in our classroom, or what would you like us to pull in from
I
this
think,
class?
yeah, that's a good question. So I think a good response to me, a good response to me has, in a sense, a warm comment, as well as, and maybe we could call it a cool comment, but it's not that it's like, oh, this is bad, but like, hey, have you thought about this? I'm wondering about this. Could you say more about that? Something that pushes the author to think, as well as something that resonates with you or you just think is really, what I don't want is a bunch of comments that are like, awesome blog, like, I get that, and they are, but how are we pushing each other's thinking as well? So it doesn't have to be about the writing style, that's not what but just more of like, okay, I wonder how this looks like, especially because some of you, you're not necessarily in grade pods. So you might say, well, I get that for this grade, but I'm struggling to see how this is going to be enacted in my area or in my grade level or with this kind of kid or something like that. Okay? And we're clear that we're going across on the... Oh, yes, sorry.
Is it freaky?
Close reading and creating text evaluations.
Thank you.
Wow, you brought all of your jaws.
Freaky text and questions.
We're risky.
Yeah.
And you neglected them all. So it needs to be fixed.
Okay, so tonight we have a nice agenda. We're going to start with discussing chapter 4, Jatan and Lee's chapter, about learning about using text. We've got an activity we're going to engage in, a cognitive activity. We're going to talk about strategic behavior and learning strategies. So we're going to take what I talked about on the PowerPoint in terms of the comprehension PowerPoint and take that a little bit further in terms of what does it mean to have some of those strategies that were mentioned toward the end of the PowerPoint about predicting and visualizing, how they cut across those meta-analyses. And then engage finally in some text and task analysis and a close reading activity. So to start, I'd like us to engage around chapter 4, only I want to do so using a protocol. This is a really good website. You can find it at the bottom of the very bottom of the page. It's nsrfharmony.org. So if you want to highlight that or circle that, there are tons of discussion protocols in there. And one of the reasons I really like these as well is when you think about perhaps engaging in some book study, some PLC discussions. The idea behind these are text protocols. There's like 100 of them to guide discussion. Sometimes they're text-based discussion, sometimes they're just simply discussion around kids or topics or data or whatever. I just find this to be kind of stupid.
Yeah.
It's like hilarious.
That's how I pack my lunches.
That's how you roll.
I'm like,
Like looking for hints and have to repeat. Good time. Go on.
So what I like about them from a professional development standpoint is we know how this can work where some voices can dominate in your grade level team, in your department, on your faculty. And I think that discussion protocols diffuse power because people have to be accountable in, like, especially the ones that use rounds where everybody has to say something. So you might want to think about just filing these as we use these and thinking about these because at some point, again, you're early in the program, but part of the goals of this program is to develop you into a literacy leader. And when you're going to start to be asked to lead some professional development in your school, I'm a huge fan of this kind of work. So tonight's text protocol is called the 3 levels of text protocol. You can see the purpose is to deepen understanding of the text and explore implications for participants' work. And that's what I like about this one, is it doesn't just stay at the text level, but it's applied then to what are the implications for what you do in the classroom. Each round takes up to 5 minutes per person in the group. So be sure to keep time. I want you guys to find somewhere to go, join a group, so that at least there's groups of 3 or 4. And so here's the round. So we start with one person. Read aloud a passage that you've selected that really resonated with you in the reading. Say what you think about the passage, and then say what you see as an implication for you in your practice. You get up to 3 minutes to do that, and then the group has 2 minutes to respond to the passage that you selected. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes right now to go ahead and skim back through. I know it's probably been a while since you read this, or maybe you read it on the drive over, I don't know. I have seen people reading while they drive on I-55. It's kind of scary. Oh, yeah. Not just on their phones, but like literally in traffic. When I used to go to US, when I was working in the city, I saw that quite a bit. So I'll give you 5 minutes to find a passage that resonates, and then we'll go into our protocol. Okay? Do this site as possible. On the bottom.
Oh, okay.
What do you all need to?
Lauren, I just suggest that you go first. In your group.
Oh,
That
okay.
you share.
Let's see, there's your microphone.
That's what I have.
I thought I was being closer, but I was not. Look at us. Like that.
So everyone saw their blog partners? And have you written your emails down?
Just basically seeing if
No, we did last week, because did you
Okay, we started at 5 minutes.
Before we get caught up with this, and I forgot to ask, so I had 3 other people in my group. I know that some people had 4, but you just had 3. And Mike was running 3, right, for the blogs.
Yeah, I don't know how to make it fair between 3 or 4. But since you're all in a group, yeah, it's just everyone responded. Yeah.
So I respond to all of 3.
Okay, are we only respond to 3, or we respond to everybody?
No, just if you only respond to 3, but if everyone sort of is,
Okay.
you're kind of everyone will get some comments. Yeah, just don't leave anybody out.
Okay, well, we won't. Alright, ready, Ashley?
We said we're going across.
So,
Okay, really quick before we transition. Nice, bring up whether if you're all you have to do is because some groups have 3 and some groups have 4. For groups with 4, you only have to respond to 3 people. You don't have to respond to all 4. I'm gonna make it so that it's even. Everyone just responds to 3 people. And if you all mix it up, everyone will get comments. Does that make sense?
No, because you can't respond to yourself, so what do you mean groups of 4 only respond to?
He means 4
other
in addition to because the groups are either 4.
yeah.
I'm sorry, because some have 4 and some have 5.
Right,
Okay.
so
Yeah,
respond.
sorry.
So,
So,
other than myself.
no. She thought she was going into labor, but it turned out it was something that was causing. Yeah, she's still. Sorry, 4 and 5. So respond to 3, whether you're in a group of 4 or 3.
And that's due when?
It'll be in the module. But next Thursday. By next Thursday, I expect. I mean, again, it's not a whole lot. It's a short response. Good. We're good on that? All right, are we about ready? No. Okay. Yeah, I love like the 4 A's text protocol. So if you go into the protocol.
I also highlighted. Oh, okay.
Because you've done this training?
Okay, so. That, so that was something that.
Well, there's something called spam bots. It's not necessary.
Instructional design, went to consider what the long-term goals are, and what the benefits to the small.
All right, so what I'm going to do is keep macro time, but it's up to you in the groups to keep your time. So the first round is 5 minutes. We have all groups of 4 except 1. So you'll just have a leftover 5 minutes to chat about something else.
Okay.
Let's go with, except for this group, because Lauren's going to go first. The person in your group with the oldest car, you'll go first.
Yeah. So I felt like I would like to.
Okay.
Oh.
All right, the timer begins now.
Yeah, I feel like.
I'm like 3 minutes into
I don't know if you guys remember, and maybe in Illinois, I don't know what case, they I don't know, no, it's fine, I don't know, but we can, that wording. Okay, and then I also, I noted that research shows teachers think more about
Just driving from Bolingbrook.
Oh, yeah. So you felt like you were going on the other side of the world? Yes. Yeah. And I don't know if I'll take your class this summer. Last summer I took 9 credits.
That was
And I
my
horrible summer. Because I just was so stressed out. So I may not even take your class.
Or maybe there's one intersection.
I really need to take my writing class with Dr. Leader.
What did I notice about
I missed that. I could have taken it in the fall, but I totally missed that it was even being
motivation?
So it probably won't come around again for a while, right?
Okay, well then I'll stop.
But it's not long enough to where you're still doing it.
Right. Well, and 36 credits into it, so 39
And
No,
I
it's
feel
not.
like
It's maybe people do independent study.
I don't know what I wanna, I don't have too many things I write, but I wanna make some writing. Visualize. Oh, great note about writing. I have this very.
Because I talked about being and I have third graders who do a survey, so they're like unaware of what it is. And I get it. So I worry in the past was that they wouldn't tell me seriously.
And that's not true of all the teachers, that's true of a few. And those are the few that are freaking out.
And they don't have a man trying to they drive their team.
Even ones who have kids write, they're not writing. They might be teaching writing or writing processing, but they're not really doing it very heavy text evidence.
Yes, but I just gave, I tweaked.
Have you read Helix's text?
Yes. And I used some of that information in my presentation, and I used a lot of other information, but they're just doing their feedback. And I feel like I have to try and back off a little. I had way more information,
I think one thing that you might consider is making that right. The more they go through the process, the more they make their so it's slow them down, but then make it easy, because you can't see it unless you're doing it. And they're not gonna do it on their own. So in your workshops, you're able to have that instructor play. And that's why I like doing this stuff, because I've taken some people through those actually, like, let's do slip and trip. And it stretches them to think about how they would do that. And then what I do is I did a workshop. That was one of the things I did. So I showed them, we did slip and trip together. And it was with the CTE department. And I said, okay, so what if I use this instead? And I put up like a model of design. And I said, so did they follow design principles or not? And then they have to come up with evidence. Yes, they did. They didn't. You know, sort of like a mismatch. It was like I said, I don't have perfect examples, but you can certainly create examples. Or I said, in business education, okay, here's a balance sheet. Did they use finance? Did they use some accounting principles? No. Peppered in some mistakes. They would have to find the evidence. So there's ways to take, I think, some and put it in the ways. You know?
I created a and they had to do so they show them about relevant and irrelevant information.
That's your 1 minute warning on this round.
So I created 10-minute, so they had the first thing of an accident or whatever I created, a robbery or anything, they could only take their turn in 10 words.
There had to be a claim.
Yes.
And they don't see themselves. So here's the problem: they don't see themselves as writers. Think of the messages they're communicating, right? Okay, that's about 5 minutes, so transition to the next person.
They were trying, they
So which is all of that, which, you know, will have at night, I have no idea, but I just thought right away, all this stuff, and I created around. Cause the effect of what that means. And that's what triggered when I read that first. Video games for my friends. You know, because they're so great to themselves. Right, yeah. Right, and so you really want to be in it, and that's it is, it's so hard, you know, I just like, you have a story that one of their paper, they're always posted in our, so they tell you local, all different reasons. I mean, are they, so like, there's, yeah, I mean, even how announcements that talk about they just talk about their recount. So, sorry? No, I didn't. I picked something up. I'm reading.
People hadn't seen it.
No, and they know how to get online to use like the citation links. So I said, well, guess what? I told them to use it all the way, all the ones I have at home. And they can page there and they can see it. How they go. A lot of them go to research and then they can copy down the information and then they can use this. So we showed them how to use the library and how to use citation linker. But the assignments.
It's funny, I don't even get this anymore because I just do the online subscription. But there is something about having it. It makes me rethink it sometimes.
I started grabbing my other kids and be like, online and then they share it with me. Well, they say that I can comment because I always get a chance to write it. I like that. I like that better than handing paper.
It's your 2-minute warning. Well, you know you can also make voice comments to people though. There's an app within Google Docs. You just put voice comments and the app will come up and you can install that and you can talk. That worked for English teachers and everything. You know, sometimes a comment can be taken the wrong, you know, versus what are you doing or what are you doing here? Like I'm just trying to, you know, more inquisitive. They might take this. I don't know if that works on the iPad, but I know, you know, when you're in Docs, you can set it up on
I just don't understand the logic.
Okay, you should be wrapping up round 2, moving on to round 3.
Alright, so find opportunities to research several ways of generating So again, yeah. Maybe it was taking a passage out of creating a copy and analyzing their passages. Really interesting, which is something I really want to try. But again, going against the textbook. Different kinds of text that would be interesting, like magazines, technological magazine, gamer. My son
Sorry, I have a team friend who's 7th grade.
Well, I'm not to create. That's why.
And he started trying
So that when they do this live.
he started on Thursday. What's his the kids found the author intentionally juxtaposed the passages. It made it seem like the version of
Putting the two together.
Wow, so you might want to, as I'm hearing you, can use the textbook for other reasons besides that.
I know there was well,
that's good. That's good. Two-minute warning. Warning for round 3.
If they're interested, even if it's a level, the interest there, they can. Right, we're going to fight through it further than if it was
they can't. I mean, I haven't seen it too. They're talking about what we're doing. So that's what I'm really trying to do. Because I lose so many. They're gone. Okay. It's frustrating.
So, you know, showing them that, like having an eye, they know if you start to struggle through a fifth grade book, and if you really, struggle, pretty over it, of course, but
Okay, you should be wrapping up that round and move into your final round.
That's an excellent idea.
You get up there.
Might have a bonus round.
like, I think as you're reading stuff, it's like there's, in your mind, like what you're thinking about, just, so they can see that even kind of adult nature is
I am so excited to do that. Yes, that's such a great idea. However, now I gotta fall.
Oh, that was a great idea.
Yay! I didn't know. Try that.
Yeah. I know.
Find any like? There's a bunch of them. And there are ones that actually have some smart conditions. It's like, there's no reason to use this program. I'm not talking about brown grocery. I mean, they're doing the whole chapter. If you had it on a short things are going to start reading that passage. That's still honoring the way I personally Right, and you'd have to modify them, so it wouldn't be an implication for practice, but it could be something, a connection to text. 2-minute warning. 2-minute warning. Right. Even just a framework of this, like the 4 A's, whatever that one, it's like, I really like that one because it's what assumptions is the author making, what do you want to argue with the author, what do you agree with the author, and what do you aspire to. You can change the A's to anything. What are the arguments, what do you agree with, what do you argue with.
They have to open a book and tell how the fortune is just stand up and speak about how the fortune is related to their life.
It's getting, you're building a routine. These are the classroom routines we have, putting a fun activity. All right, so wrap up your last thought here in your group. And then we're gonna go bonus round. One is, the bonus round is this. One, what did you think about going through this process as an adult? What were the advantages of a really highly structured, and what were some of the limitations and things you found frustrating in the, I go, you go, that sort of thing. So that's bonus round part one, and then bonus round part two is there a way you can manipulate this to have kids interact around text in the way that you interact around text? Maybe a shorter piece of text, but how could you manipulate this to have them go through some rounds of text discussion? So that's the bonus round. You got 5 minutes to talk about those two things.
Already, I'm like, no, okay, another idea, another idea for all grade. They did more of a written response. Really, it was Foursquare. I would start, we would each have a paper, we would write the most interesting thing or the graded paper, and I would get your paper and we would write yours, but I couldn't write anything that you had written. So it got harder and harder, and you got more time on each step, but it was really interesting. And there was something I really wanted not for me, I would have liked that kind of for an adult, I felt better, okay, I really so versus, I only have 30 seconds to talk. It kind of I don't know, with your cell phone, I liked it when you were in your process of that. I'm not sure. Something, yeah, something where it's to them discussion. Everyone. I don't know how. They'd all have to be busy doing sort of like trade with. I like the really collective. Yeah.
All right, last minute, so wrap up your conversations here in the last minute.
I don't know, if she's been just. I just, you know, and to me, I never, all the last thing was short.
Okay. I've passed out a reading. So I'd like you to have a pen in hand while reading. I want you to read this passage. You can mark it up as you want, underline anything you think is important. I want you to just read it through. When you're finished, you'll let me know that you're finished by putting your pen down. So that way I'll know when everyone's finished. Okay? Too bad, read it again.
I went out of this class.
Of course, both
No, I
of them
literally
are.
took it out of a website thing. And then I had my kids read it. Oh, I read this too. See, I think we read.
I'm giving you the original experiment actually. So. Okay, please flip your paper over. You're going to make 3 lists on the back of the paper, so leave room for 2 more. Write down as many important details as you remember from the text. Go ahead. say 30 more seconds, write down again, details. Okay, you got enough? Flip the paper back over. I want you to read it a second time. This time I want you to read it as if you were gathering details because you were going to rob this house. Okay? So your purpose for reading is to read it as if you wanted to rob the house. Go ahead and read it a second time. This time, let me know you're finished by flipping your paper over. Okay, this time I want you to write down as many details as you remember from the reading, when you were reading from the perspective of robbing the house. Okay, flip your paper back over. Last time, I promise. Want you to read it again. Only this time, read it as though you're buying the house. Okay, so read it one last time with the perspective of you're buying the house. Or potentially buying the house. You're looking to buy the house. And let me know you're finished by flipping it over. And on the back, write down all the details pertinent to buying the house that you remember. Okay, now I want you to score your protocol. You're going to look at your second two lists. What I've given you is a checklist. So list A is the one where you wrote down everything about robbing the house. Put check marks for any ones that you wrote down. And then list B, check that against your last list for buying the house. And just check off whatever you wrote down, put a check mark on the protocol page.
Oh, is studying the same thing as den?
Yeah. You're looking at your second and third list. And then when you finish, go ahead and give your number, total up your number.
For both of them?
Well, total A, and then a total for B. Get a number. And then the last thing I want you to do over, like on the left side, go ahead and put look back now at your first list and check off any of the details you listed across the two lists. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So look at A and B together and just put a little check mark on the left side if you wrote it down in your first list.
Okay. I thought it was on it. You got more than one thing.
Are you gonna go see some
Yeah.
I would like to.
Hey, that's what we were just talking about, new siding, that was important.
More important than the damn basement.
Yeah. because new siding was important. I wrote it twice.
Well, so these were the most that they were thought to be. I mean, this was chosen by the researchers. So yes, Tavani talks about this in the text, but I want you to take you to the original experiment. This originally comes out of psychological research by people who are interested in studying people's schema for reading. And so, what do you notice? Well, maybe the first thing you notice is what's your actual mindset. Are you a robber? Are you a
Or Tavani and I remember tonight was supposed to be like a robber. Was this like a video?
Now, again, it's important to note that this is a memory task. So I think we have to be careful because it might not be deep comprehension. It's for memory. But what happens when you set a purpose? You got most of it. As I'm walking around, I see, right, most of the people got the checks, right? So an important piece. This has been a huge study in reading research that says we should be having kids set purposes. We should set a purpose for reading. Here's where I think we've taken this research and maybe have misapplied it. We, the teachers, have taken over the purpose for reading. And we tell kids, this is your purpose, this is your purpose, this is your purpose, this is your purpose, right? Instead, what the research should suggest is that we need to be setting a purpose for reading. That if we can set our own purpose for reading, then there is a greater likelihood that we will remember certain elements of the text, and we can recruit different schemas, etc., as we go through. So I want to start tonight by talking a little bit about strategy versus skill, and how do we build strategic behaviors in kids. So we talked about, well, in the module, I talked about comprehension, right? These multi-dimensions of comprehension. And we have lots and lots and lots and even more comprehension strategies, right? So just really quickly, let's just go around the room. Let's just have a massive verbal brainstorm. Shout out any comprehension strategies you've used as a teacher.
Synthesizing.
Visualizing.
Inferring.
Read for understanding. Questioning.
Any idea?
Evaluation. Critiquing. Sequencing.
Okay? Now, talk at your table. What activities have you used to get kids to do some of these different strategies? So I'm very encouraged that you're talking in terms of the strategic behavior and not just shouting out QARs, GIST, anticipation guides, right? Because that's how these strategies get embedded. So, but I kind of like to refer to them more as activities. And so what activities have you used that get kids to synthesize, corroborate, infer, compare and contrast, question? Go, talk at your table.
We'll draw a picture of what you see. Visualize it and draw a picture of what you're
Illustrating. Right, I do sentence and then I have them do it and write a letter to
All right, let's talk strategy a little bit. So there are different components of strategic behavior. we have generalized strategies that can be applied within and across all sorts of situations, right? Sometimes these are referred to as learning strategies, right? So what's one of the most, probably my most hated, but one of the most used learning strategies of all time that's very general? KWL, right?
I hate KWL.
Thank you, I hate KWL too. What do you know? Nothing. What do you want to know? Nothing. What have you learned? Nothing. Okay. Let's go. Okay. No, as a framework though, it's not, it's grounded in something good. I think what it's turned into is just columns of, that's never, I like that, columns of crap. So that's a general. Now, but we also have domain-specific strategies. We recruit different strategies for different purposes, whether we're reading literature, history, science, right? So we have, it depends on the genre of the text. It depends on the discipline we're in, or the domain. So that's one dimension, but then another dimension, we have surface level strategies that help us get through something quickly. Maybe it's simply for memory, maybe it's simply for some simple, like decoding, simple processing, whatever, versus deep processing strategies that really help us to grapple with and make meaning from text independently. So here's a question back to you at your table. When you talked about some strategies and activities used to get at those strategic behaviors, which ones are surface level and which ones are actually getting at some deep processing? Which ones are general and which ones are getting kids to think about domain-specific strategies when they're reading literature versus reading social studies or literature versus science or something like that? So
Oh, I'm right. Short paragraph, like, and practice. Kind of helps them kind of about why they're just drawing here, things like that.
So it's not that general and surface level are not important, but if we think about that disciplinary literacy triangle, how are we moving students to develop domain-specific strategies and deep processing strategies? And I think it's sort of that your own self-test, your own self-regulation to say, if I'm going to spend time on an activity that's supposed to be engendering a strategic behavior, is it leading to something that's really generalized or something domain-specific? Am I balanced in these and moving beyond surface level of that text to deep processing of any text in that family of texts? Now, at the same time, there are lots of knowledge demands placed on students as they read, and so that's going to impact their strategy use. Okay? So we have linguistic knowledge that they're bringing to bear on the text. They have subject matter knowledge, not just of the domain, not just what do I know about science or literature, or Greek tragedy or whatever the domain is, but also how about the topic, right? So if we take the domain of science, there's lots of different topics. There's biology, there's chemistry, there's physics, there's earth science, and then even within there, there's subtopics, right? So there's river flow, and there's gravity. So how much do we know about that? On top of that, then there's also one's motivation, their intrinsic and external motivation to read, as well as their interest. Because I can be disinterested in something yet still motivated. So don't confuse these two. But what's their interest? What's their individual interest in something? And what's their situational interest, meaning I'm interested for now in the task. I really like my teacher, so I'm interested in the task. This is something that seems kind of cool, but tomorrow I'm not really going to care about it. Versus, like, I'm obsessed with Harry Potter, and so anything Harry Potter I keep reading or whatever that is. So all of these come together to form what Patricia Alexander and her colleagues have theorized as a model of domain learning. So if we're going to learn in a domain, we'll walk through this. All of these things are interacting, but what I like about this don't worry about what's in here. This idea of moving students from acclimation to competency to proficiency and expertise. So how does one move? She divides them into 3 stages, which is very simple. It's a simple way of thinking about it. Perhaps maybe there's other stages, but hers is, you know, I'm just kind of getting used to this. I can do it, but now I know it deeply, right? And so her argument is that initially, when you're acclimating to something, yeah, I'm in it now. Like, I'm really interested in this for right now. And eventually that will decline because one's individual interest will peak. Because now you own what it is. At the same time, obviously your topic knowledge is zooming up. Your domain knowledge is zooming up. I don't know why it breaks here, but that's what she has. Probably just not to make all the lines look the same. But your strategy knowledge, her argument is it's high early because you're trying to grapple, you're figuring out what's going on, so you have to recruit some strategies. In the competency phase, it levels off. However, when we get to proficiency and we start adding more and more complex text because we're becoming an expert and we keep getting deeper and deeper into it, it actually rises back up because it has to be strategic to deal with the new, increasingly complex text. So just take it as, you know, you're a freshman in college. Oh no, wait a minute, this isn't like high school, I'm doing all this stuff. And eventually you reach this competency stage. And then perhaps think about it as you entered a master's program, if you were to enter into a doctoral program, your strategies for reading and writing have sort of changed because you're in this phase and you're developing proficiency and expertise. That's a model. You don't have to agree with this model. This is a cognitive model of domain learning that takes into account strategy use. So then I'm left with this question, and I don't even know how much I agree with this. What's the difference then between strategy and skill? I don't know. I mean, I'm posing this. Like, if you had so this is floating in the background, we'll let that be. But if someone were to ask you, what's the difference between strategy and skill, what would you say?
I'd say it's you use a strategy to improve your skill. Strategy is kind of the bridge to get to the skill.
Okay.
The skill is
The
what you
skill is
learn.
what you obtain, and the strategy is how you get there.
So the skill is an outcome. The strategy is the procedure or the method, the activity. Okay. Other ways you... This is what Fisher and Fry say. Bergen. That a strategy is a conscious plan, whereas a skill is automatic. So I don't have to be strategic about tying my shoes. Right? My 5-year-old does. Loop, loop, bunny ear, through, pull. Right. And then we have different, right? There's different ways to say it, right? But I don't have to use any strategic behavior to think about tying my shoes. It's just an automatic procedure. Same with reading a text. So let's go back to the house.
So how did it get to be automatic? You had to practice it.
Right.
You need a strategy.
Right.
So, but.
Well, let's talk about the house that you read, not your house. Did you employ any strategic behavior when reading it the first time? So I hand you a text, I said, here, read it. Did you do anything consciously while you read it? Certainly not to decode, right? And certainly not to, But how about for comprehension? Did you do anything? Is there anything you can think of if you reflect back on that? Were there any conscious plans made by you that you were engaged with?
Well, the second time when you told us what to read it for, I marked the text specifically for
Okay,
those
so
things.
your behavior was to annotate because now I've given you a purpose. Okay?
I sequenced in my mind. Like I was going through like, all right.
So you were very conscious of doing that.
I would say on the third time when you were talking about buying, when we were trying to think about buying, I was really visualizing so that I could remember more of the details. So I was like, okay, it has a big yard, and then it should have new siding, and so I was trying to match that with my scheme of like houses with big roofs and new things.
Okay.
I would say I did that on the first one. When you were talking about walking through the house and what they were seeing, I was using imagery to visualize their process through the house. But I only know that now that you asked me what did I do.
Right, I wasn't thinking, I wasn't
contemplating.
Right, because you're a skillful reader,
Yeah.
right? You're a skillful reader.
Visualizing time.
Okay, so let me ask you this. So on the ride over when you were reading Chetan and Shanahan, no, I'm kidding. I saw all your annotations and highlights. That would be terrible if you were reading and highlighting what you were How strategic were you? Yeah, when you were reading the chapter for this week, for example.
Lots of highlights.
So what sort of strategies did you employ reading an academic text, like a fairly dense academic text?
I was looking for
Rereading.
ideas.
Yeah, I summarize. I have to write down like a sentence or two every couple pages of what I read.
Yeah, I have to do that, or I would forget.
She always looks like.
Okay, so you're doing your one sentence summaries, you're jotting down main ideas and details.
I determine importance using my highlighter.
So anything that's important, you're highlighting.
I reread it when it's confusing.
Reread when it's confusing.
I try to focus on the connections because I'm, for my perspective of kindergarten, I need to try to make those connections to make it make sense to me.
So you're making connections to your classroom,
I would look up words too.
looking up words. So if we look at it that way, you're competent readers. Now you're in the phase of proficiency and expertise, and yet you're using more strategy with texts that are building your. So if we think about it, the model holds. If we look at it in this way. So this also says it requires thought about which plan to use and when to use them. So a thing to really discuss versus if it's a skill, it doesn't require thought, interpretation, or choice. So when you were reading Chetan and Lee, were you consciously aware of what you were going to do, or did you automatically I read my one sentence summary? I looked for main ideas. I think this is where it gets. I'm not so sure it's so clear when these things happen and don't happen. I mean, because you can be metacognitive about it and know it now, but I'm really trying to ask you to sort of remember what you were doing when you were reading. But that's how they're differentiating these.
Isn't it, well, we do what works best for us.
But when comprehension starts to break down on these more difficult texts, I do the rereading, but I find that I do something else to help me to understand if it's taking a note, if it's highlighting, if it's putting a star or a question mark. When comprehension starts to break down, I find I have to do something else.
I see where you're coming from. You were starting off with what's the difference between skills and strategies, and we said it takes strategies to develop the skill, but it's not like then you just take off all the scaffolding and abandon it and you don't need them anymore. You keep going back as needed and reusing them when the text gets more difficult.
But you don't need that activity to do that, right?
Right.
We don't need that worksheet, that organizer, that activity to do. So we've been gradually released from that, and we just.
Already anticipated my next slide.
Yeah.
Keep going.
I have a presentation I have to give tomorrow on this. But we gradually released ourselves, so we don't require that activity. Our brain just naturally gets there. So how do we get our kids to that point, right? So are we teaching them reading strategies versus being a strategic reader?
So this is a key word here, and they don't use this in this, but there are 3 levels of strategic behavior. There's the declarative, you know what it is. So you all can identify visualizing, summarizing, connecting, right? So that's declarative. Then there's the procedural. I know how to do it. First I do this, then I do this, then I do this, then I do that. I think we do a great job in school
Doing the procedure.
declarative and procedural. The third level, though, is conditional. When do I use it? Why do I use it? So where are we getting kids to be metacognitive themselves about, see, you can't, okay, my comprehension breaks down. Comprehension breakdown. Okay, so now I have to do something. You recognize that. Okay, I'm going to reread. I know what it is, I know what the procedure is, but I know why this is a time to reread, because I have had a complete comprehension breakdown. You have the conditional. I don't know in our strategy instruction that we've gotten beyond declarative and procedural. That's just it's something to think about in terms of if we're going to get kids to do this, that they have to have that conditional knowledge. Yeah.
And I would even say along with, like, and I guess this is more conditional, but with the declarative, like, I don't really know, at least in the curriculum that we were using up until this year when we switched to Common Core, like, it was very much like, this week we're doing summarizing, so everything you do, you're going to summarize, and they didn't get to choose to summarize, and so I don't even know if they can name summarizing because we keep naming it for them.
Right.
And
It's
that's
summarizing in September.
Right, like,
And then we don't ever summarize
and
it.
then we're gonna compare and contrast and like, and we,
That's what Dr. Sunday
Cummins.
Cummins was saying. Like, that's what I found really funny was we do that in September and then we don't synthesize and oh well, that's okay, we'll do it next year. Okay.
Yes, I cringe when I walk into schools and see strategy of the week or strategy of the month. Okay, we're not, beer of the month club, jam and graham of the month club, and that's what it becomes, right? It's each month takes on a new. You can tell what part of the month club I would belong. But that's like my argument is that we turn these into discrete activities that only focus on declarative and procedural instead of conditional and flexible use of a strategy. You're also very flexible in your use. Sometimes you might only use a part of it. I don't reread the whole thing. I reread just the part. I don't write all the main ideas and details down. It's only maybe, certain parts that were more confusing. You might have more annotations, or I start summarizing more because this is really dense. And then it's like, oh, here's some classroom example. I don't need to summarize for 5 pages. So you're also flexible in that.
I have a question that maybe you don't really answer to, but so what, like all these Basel series that are so strategy driven and so like strategy of the month club, was there ever like research or theory behind that being a best practice, or did they just like make it up and then everyone did that for like 10 years?
Well,
It was the anarchy.
Well,
there is a robust body of research, but we have to remember that it's experimental and quasi-experimental research. So conditions were created for using these.
Okay.
That those strategies and explicit instruction in those strategies does garner a result.
Right.
No different than purpose setting.
Right.
Right, like we did here. Like, okay, so you can remember all the important details about robbing a house versus buying a house, right? But when we enact it in the classroom, that's something, those studies weren't always done in classrooms in terms of how does that link up with the curriculum. So when writing it, it seems to make sense, but how they're enacted, I think, is a different story. So I love this term. It comes from Anne Brown, who was a part of Brown and Palinsar and reciprocal teaching, but Anne Brown was a heavy hitter researcher. And she called what happens oftentimes as lethal mutations. So we have an experiment done or a study done, and then people take it in their own ways, and they turn into new things, and they ultimately become lethal mutations. And it was never the way it was intended. Because at some point, you do have to learn the declarative and procedural. Right? So you can't get away from that in some ways. And I think that's also where some of these basals are coming from, is that this is an opportunity, an explicit opportunity with text, to teach some specific strategies. But you're talking about new siting. So, I don't know, 5 years ago we had a hailstorm, we got new siting. and kind of the scaffolding thing hit me, right? If we always leave the scaffolds up, my siding, the guys would still be there putting the siding on one part of the house. We do that in teaching if we never remove scaffolds. So if the basal continues to go, summarizing, here's your summary stuff, and it never fades, and not that we're not returning to it and wrapping it up, and sometimes a new piece is like, okay, now the neighbor kid whipped the baseball against the side of my house and I have to have this one piece replaced. I gotta pull a scaffold back and fix that, and then I take it away. We tend to leave scaffolds up, and basals do this, I think. They leave the scaffold the whole time and never remove it.
Yeah, like K through 5.
So then we can't get to these levels if we're not removing scaffolds. I'm gonna jump because you brought up the gradual release responsibility model. We talk a lot about this in schools, but I think we have to examine how are we releasing responsibility of strategic behaviors with kids. So this is, we see lots of models of the gradual release model, but originally it's Pearson and Gallagher in 1983. And I'm just gonna throw this out there. I'm a research head. When I I usually reference the big names, and down the road you'll want those. So you might want to jot down in your notes like Pearson and Gallagher 1983, because when you take comprehensive exams and things like that, it's always nice to put in there that you really know the literature. So just throwing that out. So Pearson and Gallagher 1983. But in some ways we could simplify this into I do as the teacher, we do together, you do with each other, you do independently. That's the same thing, right? We have modeling, and then guided practice, where there's joint responsibility happening. It's all the students going, and we see that release of responsibility, and ultimately the individual student can apply it. So this was their kind of clunky model, actually, I think. Versus a different way we can look at it is just I do, we do, you do, you do. Like something like this. And Dr. Lally and I were just having this conversation about close reading, and one of the things we're noticing a lot of the exemplars of close reading is there's a whole lot of this. The teacher, right? And I challenge that. I think we should challenge that. That maybe perhaps, and this is Tim Shanahan's argument back to like doing picture walks and activating prior knowledge about close reading thing for so long. We do a 30-minute, prior knowledge piece on 3 pages of text. So we're spending all of this time, which is a lot of I do, for a minimal amount of text, so that it's ultimately a minimal amount of you do. Question? Comment?
I think probably both, but I'll just say whatever comes through my mind. I'm thinking that part of the reason that so much time is still spent on that, I just said to Chrissy, just from when we were in school, that's how we would talk. That whole building the background, and you had to write your lesson plan strategically to that, and you were graded on that.
That's this kind of research, right?
Yes.
That
Okay,
got
but then-
crazy.
Yeah, but then the other thing is, like, I keep thinking about the whole close reading thing, and I still think that it is defined differently by everybody. It is defined differently, not even just differently by individuals, but by grade levels, and by school buildings, and then by school districts. And a parent, seriously, who is not an educator, thinks close reading is this. And I'm not joking, because one of my neighbors just said it to me, and I kind of chuckled, and she goes, "It's a teacher term, isn't it?" And I just was like, it's new to everybody, but maybe it's not new, and we just were.
Well, okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. It's not new.
No.
So-
Okay, but.
No, I don't mean it's not new. It's not a new idea.
Yes.
It's new to education.
Yes, okay, so I I just don't understand how everybody understands all of us to understand this when there's so many different meanings and so little help for us educators right now. Like, I don't have good text to do close reading with. If I'm supposed to have good text, I don't even know, do I need a good text? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, I feel like I've been in different master's classes or just different professional development, and they all have defined close reading differently.
So how have they defined it? Give me one definition of close reading.
Reading.
Oh, one thing that sticks out of my mind is framing your piece, reading it closely, what was the author's purpose for it, and really rereading and going over what that was meant by that little piece given. I had one class that I went to within the district that seriously, she took the entire, I don't know how many weeks, and just kept putting, I want to call it chart paper up on the board, and she would be like, now closely read this. Highlight, what do you get out of it? What are your main points? Now go back and reread. I'm confused.
Okay, you want a history of it? Here it is. Close reading comes out of rhetoric. When you hear rhetoricians talk, they talk about doing a close read of the text, which means, and this comes out of the literary canon, it comes out of new criticism. Okay, so this comes out of the 30s and 40s in schools of English, basically, which they started to make an argument that all meaning resides in the text. That the author has written something, and there's not this massive, like, oh, this is how it makes me feel, and which is what Louise Rosenblatt talked about in terms of a transactional model of reading, that we bring something to the reading, the author's bringing something, and there's a transaction that actually occurs within the text. The new critics argued that meaning derives from the text itself. You have to go back into the text, you have to find textual evidence for that, you have to pull out the literary elements,
Figurative language.
yeah, figurative language, metaphors, and all that stuff in the text, and how they're using that to communicate a message. So when they call it a close read, it means we're closely sticking to the text. It's not my interpretation of what I think about what I know about the author, or it's just we have the words on the page. Okay, so just one of the key writers of the Common Core Standards, David Coleman, is a literary critic. He comes out of a school of new criticism. He was a Rhodes Scholar. And so his line is that no one cares what you feel. They care what evidence you can pull from text.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the core writers of the standards. I'm just telling you where it comes from. So when the standard says you have to cite specific textual evidence, they're looking that you stay close to the text. Now, I think this is what Tim Sheehan would argue. This comes out of a reaction when, for the longest time, we've only asked kids how they feel about text, without having to necessarily cite evidence about the text.
Do you think we're asking kids, though, how they feel about a text, or do you think we're asking kids to make a connection to the text?
And not just connecting, I have a dog.
Right, not a coincidence, I think that word connection has been thrown around far more than close reading. Like, you make a text to text, you make a text to self, you know what I'm saying? Like, so they built that, though, like, I made, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. I made a, what was I just,
Text the world. Text the
yeah,
world.
okay,
Text.
so I made a text to self, so K1, 2, they really, really worked on that. And then in 2, 3, 4, they really were working on text to text and similarities and differences and, compare, contrast, inferring what this one said, okay. So then text to world then comes along, right? I don't know, I think we spent so much time breaking these things up and really spoon feeding them that like we were just talking about, Chrissy and I, about how our school uses Scholastic News now, and I really see them making an effort to A, tie to Common Core, but B, use those I want to call it newspapers, but use those things as yes, for close reading, okay?
Mhm.
But then again, I don't know, I just feel like, so then I'm not sure, I still feel like it's all so blurry.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, so I feel like my team and my district has done a lot with close reading, and I understand it significantly better than I did this summer when we were planning or in August or anything. So basically how we do close reading is whatever story we're reading, so right now we're reading the novel Bud Not Buddy. And so we picked a passage, these basically 2.5 page passage, and we typed it up so that the kids could mark it, because we don't want them marking in the books.
Mhm.
And they read it, so we read it the first time just in the book. Then today we went back and we read it, and they marked it for figurative language, because our second close read is always for author's craft. So figurative language, idioms, metaphors, whatever was there. And then we have them read it a third time after I pose a question. So the question was, what was Mama trying to teach Bud when she was explaining this to him? It was about doors opening and closing, which is pretty far-fetched for my 5th graders, but at least seeing that there's another lesson there. So each time I have them read it, there's a different purpose, and they know very explicitly what the purpose is. And I usually read it to them the first time, so I know that they're not having like word automaticity problems with it. And they've gotten better. I mean, the first month we did it, they were all like, "What? I read it again? Are you kidding? Like, are you kidding? You're gonna keep making me read this?" But they have gotten better at even independently knowing what to highlight or what to underline to see those things. So we just pick, with our stories, we pick a passage, maybe like a page no longer than 2 pages, where there's a lot of rich author's craft or figurative language, so that there's enough to go back for. Because if you pick a random just like plot page, there's not a lot.
But like breaking that back down into preschool, K1,
Yeah, I
2, I mean,
So, but Shanahan, Fisher, they would say you're not doing close reading in K1.
But
they might say that,
but
but
your
I'm not sure your
expectation is-
district,
yeah.
districts are saying
But
that.
then you might, so this is, and I'll post some of their articles, you might wanna say,
Like,
No, okay.
here,
Like
let's
that's
take
when
a-
I'm really confused.
right, because in K1, you can make, they're still learning
They're
to
still-
decode.
Yeah,
and-
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just making sure I'm not like lost on this
Right.
because,
But remember, this class, I'm talking from the perspective of we're learning it in the domain, and we're talking about this with some older readers.
okay,
So,
sorry.
no, it's okay, because this is the stuff that, look, you are the front line in the schools, and you're the ones who have got to stand up and say, lethal mutation,
I'm gonna start
you're
calling it
misreading this. Here, read the actual text, look at the actual research, that sort of thing, so,
I was just gonna say, I don't know if you've read it, but notice a note.
yes, by peers, yeah.
I don't know, that book made sense to me because they wrote it from the perspective that close reading is really a 4th grade and up. They have to be able to decode, they have to be able to interpret other vocabulary. Kindergartners, 1st graders should not be close reading, and so, that's the new buzzword, so we have this professional development, and they're trying to get these 2nd grade and 3rd grade teachers to get their kids to do this. And I honestly, I incorporated the strategies this year at 4th grade, and I have the level of thinking that I got out of some students who are probably the lower level, sorry, what do we call them, striving readers,
Striving,
whatever,
yeah,
okay. What they produced was phenomenal, because it made me mean to them. I wasn't telling them, okay, now you're gonna use this strategy and do it. They're reading and they're like, oh, boom, this keeps appearing again and again. Why does this keep appearing again and again? And it's almost leading them to answer this anchor question, and their level of understanding is at a whole higher realm. So, I don't know, I really enjoyed the book, but when I read that first, before I understood like close reading as this, what is being told as this rereading of text, and now you read it for this purpose, and now you read it for this purpose, and now you read it for this purpose. But when I originally read that, it made so much more sense because it was just taking the text and reading it at a deeper level.
What book was that?
Notice a note, and they identify those 6 signposts.
Yes.
And I think if you show students what we mean by those signposts, then they can go off on their own and they can identify the again and again,
And we
or
did.
the contrasts and the contradictions and.
She has a signpost in her room hanging up, and we met to discuss her book for other class wonder. And as we were discussing and looking at her signpost, and all of a sudden our conversation was completely different on the book, just because she already knows it, but I didn't, and I'm reading them going, yeah, there, that happened, and I was able to use those, and I mean, I could see it being fantastic, but
It has to be the older.
and not be at the primary level.
So, well, okay, so there's Notice and Note by Colleen Beers and Bob Prost. There's also a newer one called, I might have it in my phone.
Glasses on the front.
Yeah, Falling in Love with Close
Yeah.
Reading by, by,
Glasses.
here it is, here.
Everyone's talking about the
By Chris Lehman and Kate Roberts. And they make some arguments in there for that close reading is a natural activity, if you can frame it that way, like we closely read our families, we closely read things that are important to us, you know, texts that are important to us in our everyday lives. How do we get kids to develop that mindset? So, I mean, one of the things I taught, so one, that the big dogs would say, Fry, Fisher, Shanahan, whatever, is that close reading is not a strategy, it's an outcome. You're not doing close reading as a strategy. Like, that's not a strategy. That's an outcome of a deeper inquiry into a text. I would argue that we have to develop student dispositions towards close reading because, you know, like was mentioned earlier, the kids are like, what? Read it a second time. They've never had to do that.
What?
They read for completion. They don't read, right? So just getting kids into the habit and developing the disposition is important. Developing purposes for close reading. I think it's going to be a horrible, toxic lead limitation if we just say it's Thursday and Thursdays are close reading days. And we just take and go, here's some hard informational text, and we're going to close read all period and follow these sort of scripted, like, read with a pencil in hand, the first time you read it for this, and it's like, that will be horrible. You will see that happen in places, though. Okay? Yes, and we will fight that, because that's not, there has to be a reason for it. Some things are worthy of close reading, and some things are absolutely not worthy of close reading at all. So, we have to get kids to understand, like we understand, when, why, conditionally, not just the procedural and declarative of close reading. And then they think it's, again, this other box to think. Now, I do not think the Common Core standards are going to save us. In fact, one big thing is that standards have no agency and teachers and students do. So anytime any people say, like, well, the standards say, the standards are, they're words on a page. We are the ones who have the agency, and it's how we enact the standards. But I do think if they can move us away from this discrete strategy instruction, which I would really call activity-based instruction, then I think it will do a good thing. Because if we can get kids into a disposition of interrogating text, and get kids to notice and note and understand rules of notice with literature and informational text and history and scientific, then I think we'll be doing a good thing because they're more vested in their reading instead of everything being so discretely broken down. That is, because I think what you're getting at is, when do we ever come back to the whole?
Yeah,
This-
we're not synthesized. Don't I need to read a whole
Right.
book?
Right. Where's my worksheet? What do I do with the? I don't know what to do with
What
this
am I
on my
close
own.
reading for?
Yeah.
Well, what we're noticing at the high school level, because we were having this conversation the other day, is that are they really reading for that depth, or are they just being obedient and completing the activity? And you can fake read to complete the activity, and that's what we're finding a lot of, like, our kids doing, is that they look at the questions, they automatically look at what questions do I have to answer, and look through the text. In fact, today in class, I had my kids reading a primary source from the 1920s. And I saw a kid doing that, looking at the questions and then looking at the text. And I, stop it right now. You can't, and you couldn't even answer the questions without reading the text, but he was trying. You know, so that's what we're seeing, and that's the conversation we're having tomorrow in our sit day is, at what point do we gradually release them from that, and at what point are you using activity because you wanted to get the skill, or you just want them to be obedient in completing
Isn't that a skill that they were taught though?
Yes.
Looking at the questions before reading the text?
Definitely was.
I mean, that's what we teach them for the
Especially where
test,
I
when they take the test, you know?
So, yeah, I have to say, I have, the library, the technician for the computer lab at our school, when they're math testing, she specifically says before giving the test, they want to be like, don't do that. She's like, just so you know, you're only in the lab for an hour, and there's long passages with a scroll button, and you can scroll down if it says in paragraph 5, just go right to paragraph 5, don't read all that. I was like,
You're like, no, no.
I know, and
That's
then
what
I'm not
standardized testing.
but she's
Right.
well,
Yeah,
that's
just
that.
get the
And I'm
answer
thinking,
right.
oh my gosh, like that's
You can
not,
pause the test and they can.
Well, if you haven't looked at the park samples, look at the park samples.
so,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, I know.
Because even just from a design standpoint, why they're putting them in a narrow text box when naturally we read wide across the page, why they did that, I have no idea. But that's even, that's like, that doesn't.
Yeah.
I'm piloting Clark.
Oh, yeah.
Start
Start
home.
right?
Bring back some information.
I dodged that bullet.
And
Or my teammates
Two of my teammates
Wow.
So here's what I want us to do at your table. We talk strategy, I think, as activity. I want you to come up with something where you could translate the role of strategy use to your students. So I want you to create a visual as well as have text around it, in which you could use and something that's comprehensive about strategy, not just a single strategy, but strategy use in general. We use reading strategies that they can understand. So I want you to think, how are you going to explain this to a kid? And so for those of you who think at least 4th grade, maybe you're higher. Well, no, it doesn't have to be that. Just if you're talking about using a strategy, what's a way for us to think about this that they can understand these principles of? I mean, we were talking about these in high academic terms of deep processing, surface level, individual interest, situational interest, all that stuff. How do you just make this sense to a kid? I want you to try to create a visual with some text around it. If we have to get them to get declarative, conditional, declarative, procedural, and conditional. How do we get them there? What's a way to think about that? Let's see what we come up with in say 15 minutes at the table on the ship.
Oh, okay, so starting up here. Okay, I see what you mean. Then I do a flow chart when I'm teaching.
Say that again.
So this is,
And then what if you were to like, strategies that prepare pie sets of visuals?
well, so what's up here? This is what I don't understand.
No, this is just a flow, okay, a flow chart of,
All right.
Alright.
You wanna go next? Right, what are we going to go to next?
That would be an analogy of how are we gonna like so I think that they're gonna
and then the next go down,
and then there's a task.
Right, first one.
Like how do we make that?
I did.
Yes. I want you to
That's how we decide what you have to start with first, like visualizing each side of the first page, really find out and then what is next.
What would be the most
you taught strategy.
natural?
I want you to come up with a visual representation.
Visualize?
As well as an example.
What do they do automatically? Okay, so, yeah.
Keep that in mind. What if you have a student?
Is there any bias?
What is
I
it?
need to turn the
How do you explain that to them visually as well as right out? Explain it. Is that clarified?
Name the task and then
And you teach them how to
and
use
then
it.
right this and each of you will right now they don't need to but to them thinking about it and then it goes down a little then
and then there could be that.
Okay,
when you take
Visualizing that.
Yeah. That's how we're gonna try to
It's totally fine.
Okay, first off, is there can understand the text, but then the next step down becomes the question you're putting yourself.
Okay.
You just spend how much time.
And then we come with the new.
Then we need the menu of pick something.
Looking at it right now. Pretty good.
Okay, okay. Alright.
Alright, so. Yeah.
Don't worry.
Okay, so.
The same way you can do tools out of our help you. So I would put one for the
Remember, you should have a written description with your visual.
Okay. What did you say?
For like getting the job done, because it's not, it's necessarily how to arrows in the job done, whatever you want.
Okay, so.
For getting the results.
So a little.
Helpful. They found an article.
So that would be your start.
That's right.
And then from the website, on our blog,
And I use your,
This is overall the way we're doing, it's kind of like, well, this is the order that you have to follow.
Right.
yeah, so once you get the
We can go and do it this way too.
Endless things there. So you don't have to list them all.
No, but he's saying that arrow to here, arrow to here, saying, well, this is first, and then the next one is over here, and then
I mean, I'm looking at the.
no, I didn't know that rereading process what if
You know,
you're
you
one
can
of
go
those
to the side, so I'm reading some of the.
Right, right. Well, you can, it's going around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did anyone else want to look at font level close reading? Oh, you didn't get it.
Needs to be, okay, this works.
Thank you, that's.
I just thought it was sitting there.
I'm using a lot of the close signposts with my eighth grade. It's really making a huge difference.
Look, the signposts are what Robert Scholes calls rules of notice. In literature, we have rules of notice. And it's just a signpost that makes it,
So I made a little graphic board that describes the signposts, just as it's in the book. But, I tell them, so let's review these, and they're starting to get the, and they're starting to do it on their own. But I have to say, like, remember, there's gonna be at least a couple of them here.
This one is
What about that?
Well, each metaphor, there's one of this whole thing.
It's about 5 more minutes. Remember, you should have a short written description with your visual.
What is the keyword?
Anyone else?
Right, so we're giving them a task and they have to pick the stage goal and teach them to read the same exercise.
You can read it.
Well,
It's 5 things, you're done in like 3 hours. Now what?
I know, I'm saying, we have a questions you ask.
No, I'm saying like, what tools can you use for what we're out.
This is like literally giant. Like, that's how we're total analogy. It's not even having anything to do with that. But it relates to text because just like art supplies, we're showing them math, they're automatically thinking about and so we should, in the reading room, this would be 5 different tasks and all their skills.
When's your birthday?
Picture that, the same way as.
But it may not really be I will think it's literally the same.
When's your birthday?
Right, and that's so cool. Yeah, but they're gonna figure out which skill, but that's not the purpose, right? But I'm telling you, I want.
Are you guys redoing it?
Oh, I think like you're coming to like you
Like,
are
and the strategy worked and I'm connected with the text again.
Alright, 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Oh, no, you can.
Are we reserving, like, does this
I'm
not saying this is like,
Here's actually what it looks like. I don't know what this. I have
Yeah. Just kids don't understand.
I am not a good drawer. I come from 2 sixth-grade. My father is a retired beautician. Retired Disney artist.
Oh, wow.
Worked for Disney for 30 years. He has a studio here. And he used design products to sell to different stores. And then before that, he worked for Hanna-Barbera. He designed
I think that's fine. I'm not arguing with that.
Get up and reset.
Yeah, and I have original drawings.
Oh my God.
I'm gonna bring it in and show somebody.
I don't know. But anyway, and he met my mother in our house, right? And I was first born. Went right through me to my sister. She could draw beautifully. I can't read. I'm a disappointment.
Very good. Very good.
I like the idea of
Perfection.
oh, I see.
I almost like to
Those are ways.
those ways to respond right now.
That's what I was,
Down instead of.
that's what I was trying to say with.
You should say reading for understanding. You know, that, I mean, that could be the, here's, I'm just throwing that, you guys do whatever you want, but that could be reading
Okay.
for understanding, and then this is what I do.
So I want one point of clarification that has come up, and I think it's a good thing to clarify that,
Read, learn, or whatever.
Yeah.
that I'm not arguing against individual strategy instruction with younger readers. What we're making an argument about is when they're in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, that we're not continually teaching the same strategies in the same way as they were taught in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. So bear in mind, I know that it's, you're in your, this is what I teach, but remember this class is about learning content area learning, which, and then content learning happens in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade kindergarten, I understand, but where it's sort of that shift happens in the school day for kids. We're really looking at grades 4 through 12. So I'm not saying we don't teach these strategies, and it does look different in younger grades as it does older grades. Okay, so we're gonna do a gallery walk. You gotta write it. You got the visual. Walk around, look at other people's interpretation of how they would explain this.
Alrighty.
Okay, let's take a closer.
I think that's not right. We are.
I know, but I'm just saying. Are we supposed to be ready with this? And that.
Based off research, because I need it in a way that based on it. And then, I'm busy trying to come up with
Okay, that's it. Oh, no, that's theirs. Oh, it's yours.
This is the one that's on. Is it yours too?
Yeah.
You and your cherry.
So after you look at, we're not really in a museum, we can talk. When you get back to your table groups, based on what, talk for a couple more minutes about what you saw from others, and is there anything you would revise or add to your own based on what you saw from how other people were taking up the notion of strategy and structure? Really, I feel like I'm at the Art Institute right now.
But I actually like that walking around and looking.
I love galleries.
Yes.
Especially kids. It's also fun, but it gets kids a chance to go. Yeah, she's choosing. Okay, so we've been talking about the reader and how a reader approaches text, but the text itself can also mediate how a reader interacts with the text. So the chapter that Jatana Lee wrote was about learning from text. And so what is text itself doing, and how do we match? I want to push against matching readers to text, but what is the text doing as well in terms of this transaction? So one way to look at this is, the old word readability, or now the new word Words. Common core, text complexity, right? What makes a text complex? Okay? So we as readers bring that strategy use, bring that knowledge to bear, for example, on something that we can read this, even though it's not very comprehensible to first glance, but overall it is. But what else is going on in terms of readability of a text and text complexity? Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. So let's talk first about the old algorithmic measurement of text. The Flesch Kincaid or the Fry readability of Gunning Fog. Really don't need to know. I just wanted you to know there was another one. So here's a sample text. You can conduct this the hard way or the easy way. The easy way is put it in the Word, and when you run your spell check, you will get a readability measure. The way you do that is go into your preferences if you're a Mac user, or go into your, when you're in Word, or I don't know what it is in PC, but there's some, where you get to the way it goes. And you go to Properties, and under Properties, where there's all this stuff, it's not automatically checked for you in Word, but you check readability statistics. And then that way, when you run a document on spell check, it will give you the Flesch Kincaid grade band. It'll say it's at the 9.2, the 5.7, whatever it is. But I think we should understand how this works the way Ed Fry, one of the fathers of reading, come to it. So here's what you do. Put your, you're going to take a random, you're supposed to take 3. We're going to do this once because it's very tedious. I don't know, put your pen somewhere, anywhere in the text, and count off 100 words. Start at the beginning of a sentence, though, but then count off 100 words. It doesn't have to be from the first paragraph. Sure to bracket it off. Salute. Right, do you want the hard part first or the easy part first?
Let's go easy since we obviously can't answer.
You want to go easy first?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, easy part first. Just count the number of sentences in that 100-word block. And then in the last one, decide is it half, quarter, come to some, 6.2 sentences or 6.5 sentences, basically. Just count the number of sentences in the block of 100 words that you just selected. Okay, now here comes the hard part. Yes, count the number of syllables in that 100-word block. So I will be quiet.
Oh my gosh.
The total number of syllables in that 100 words.
then what we do a simple plot along the x and y axis. So someone give me the number of sentences that they got in there.
6.
Let's start with one that had, we'll just call it 6, and then how
I
many?
had 5.5.
Well, let's go with the 6. How many syllables did you have then?
92.
Okay, we're not even on the graph at 92.
I had
So,
140 syllables.
let's get another one.
I had 6
I had 5.5
sentences and 132 syllables.
So if we had 6 sentences and 132 syllables, we are at about the 7th grade level.
I have 5.5 sentences and 141 syllables.
And there we're in at about the 8th grade level.
No.
6 sentences, 123 words,
6 sentences,
123 syllables.
123.
Okay.
So we're somewhere in this 6, 7, 8 grade band. So the way Fry works is you're supposed to do this 3 times. You're not going to do it 8 times. You know, back in the day when I was reading, teachers used to carry bags of books uphill and uphill both ways to school. We got to do it by hand.
In the snow.
In the snow, without Word to help us. Yeah, people did this. You take a textbook and you would randomly select 3 passages and average them. Okay? Flesh Kincaid takes the whole thing and does pretty much the same algorithm. So it's an algorithm. And I want to talk about some of the limitations now when we start to say something is written at the 5th grade level, the 6th grade level. I want you to quickly read this text. So let's say for purposes, this text is at the 7th grade level for an average. Go ahead and just read the text. Well, that's just an example of what it looks like in Word. It's not actually intent. That's not what Flash will look like. I just wanted to show you when you do your spell check, it will give you the grade point level. Then it gives you our reading E scores, which I'll explain. So in reading this, where are my middle school teachers? Is this written at the 7th grade level? No?
Well, I don't know, I was looking at some of the words that are definitely higher vocabulary words that they wouldn't know.
Okay.
But even the concept,
So the conceptual level.
what the concept is, without a lot of teacher support, like, I mean, I can see some 8th graders reading this in a social studies class while they're studying the 1960s and the civil rights movement, but with a lot of teacher support.
Okay. How about in a history classroom?
If I in my honors U.S. history, there would still be some vocabulary that they would struggle with, but it's short sentences. It's
and as long as they have the background knowledge, so I wouldn't just give this to them cold, I would have prepped them with the civil rights movement.
Why is it in short sentences? It's just speech, right? So what's the problem with readability in terms of a quantitative algorithmic measure?
Because because speech is a lot different than the written languages, so if you're just taking it out of our language, our oral language, then it's not necessarily a measure of a written document.
Take a novel. To Kill a Mockingbird is written at the 4th grade level. Will we give To Kill a Mockingbird to 4th graders? What's cutting its readability down? Dialogue, right? Short sentences. That's going to impact it. What if I'm reading a scientific text that has photosynthesis in it? Which might be a simple concept, but now all of a sudden we have a high readability. Or when General Washington crossed the Mississippi, which he didn't, so I don't know, I'm mixing up. Right? You get the idea. When we have lots of syllables, though, that artificially inflates readability. It's making it seem like it's a much harder readability, and yet it's not. Because we know, kids can know those concepts. Yeah.
So how is Lexile determined then, and is it the same type of idea?
It's the same type of idea. I'm not as.
I just didn't know if it had the same.
It's still
how long the
quantitative.
sentence is over how many words there are, or something like that.
It's a similar, yeah, but they come up with a scalable number.
Right. Okay. There's 3 first.
But it has the same difficulties to it as far as.
Oh, for sure.
This, I don't know why, just because they give this reading ease score, that's what those numbers mean when it says it's a particular reading ease. I have no idea what slick fiction is, but I know what pulp fiction is, but I don't know what slick fiction is. But if you want to interpret what those mean, there that is. But what about these things? How do these contribute to readability? The readability of the text. So if the text is written high or low, what about the text around the text? How does that contribute to it? How do you even read these things? I mean, there's letters and there's words in them, but what makes that readable or unreadable that a quantitative measure can't necessarily capture?
Is that sentence diagram?
Yes. Or what makes something like this readable? And I think this is also fascinating in terms of understanding the genre of the text. This comes from Seferye Garajda, which is a history of the Bosnian War. These borders represent flashback. On other pages of the text, the artwork goes all the way to the edge of the page. That represents present time. So how does a kid know to grapple with that text structure, that visual structure, even though we might say, well, oh, kids would love this because it's in comic form. And yet there's a very intentional use of the panels and the way they're designed in this.
Do you want to know what slick fiction is?
Sure.
Such a magazine, regarded as possessing qualities as expensiveness, chic, and sophistication that hold appeal for particular readership, as one whose members enjoy or are seeking affluence.
That's exactly what came to mind.
All right. Just for fun, if you want to check the reading level of a blog or of a website, you can go to Juicy Studio and they will give you the readability.
Let's do it on our blog.
All right, so we also have, what about the type of text? Is it informational text, narrative text, expository text, persuasive text? I'm going to kind of go through a little bit more quickly through this. What about different text structures? Is it chronological, compare, contrast, descriptive, point of view, problem, solution, process, cause, effect? And yet we have to have some of these qualities. So the argument is, and Common Core is saying this, although I'm still hearing way quantitative. Are we in the Lexile level? Are we in the Lexile level? Are we in the grade band level? Are they in their stretch bands? When we look at that graphic, though, it's quantitative, qualitative, reader task. No one's talking about reader text.
Oh.
But we are talking about, well, I mean in terms of like assessment.
Oh,
I don't know
yeah.
how
No,
they're
the
being
assessment's
conceptualized. But we are talking about qualitative. There are 4 levels, or 4 dimensions of qualitative analysis of a text. The levels of meaning, the text structure, the language conventionality and clarity, and the knowledge demands that one has to bring to the text. So levels of meaning. Is it a text with a clear, explicit meaning versus multiple implicit, hidden, obscure meanings, like satire? Okay, so there's an example from A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift. You know, what's making that level of meaning is, I don't think we're really talking about hitting children, right? So, structure. Low structural complexity, simple, well-marked, conventional versus high complexity, complex, subtle, unconventional. What's the role of graphics? Are we talking about simple literary text in chronological fashion or nonlinear? Texts of high complexity tend to have similar complex graphics that provide an independent source of information and yet are essential to understanding a text. So what about those things going on? How about language conventionality and clarity? Is it literal, clear, everyday language, or is it figurative, ironic, ambiguous, purposely misleading, archaic, or unfamiliar? Here's an example from Howard Zinn. The taste of empire was on the lips of politicians. Right, very metaphorical. Racism, paternalism, and talk of money mingled with the talk of destiny and civilization. So what about the language is making that difficult? And then finally, knowledge demands. Texts that make few assumptions about the reader's life experiences versus texts that make many such assumptions. So what assumption is made in this passage?
Well, National Geographic, Hamlet, knowledge of those 2 things.
Right. But if you're reading whatever this was talking about National Geographic, they're still making a literary allusion to Hamlet. And if you don't know Hamlet, the allusion to skulls and the National Geographic stuff makes no sense, right? So let's go back to these. At your table, I want you to analyze the Stokely-Carmichael text that you just read qualitatively. What about the levels of meaning, the structure, the language conventionality and clarity, and knowledge demands? You might have to go back in places and reread parts of it, but I want you to analyze it at a table along those 4 dimensions of text complexity.
I agree.
About it's not referring to anything except maybe like student non-violent coordinating, right? But at that time, there was a speech like that was, which makes it hard for me because like somebody wrote this, you know, right.
That's more.
I would say that the like applause and cheers. I mean, I guess it's not saying but
Well, I mean, for that time, there's no great
right. So I don't need to consider like the
Can I point you to a sentence in paragraph 2, 3 lines from the bottom? So some boys had to write a bill to tell that white man he's a human being, don't stop him. That bill was for that white man, not for me. I knew that all the time. What's going on there rhetorically? Who's being referred to as boy? White man, right? And yet that term contextually has been used as derogatory towards black men, right? So there's a deep level of meaning in there that if we miss that, we sort of miss how Carmichael is rhetorically arguing about what in the media is saying, what basically why are these riots happening? Why do these riots happen?
Yeah, no, I agree. That's very much.
And he's referring to legislators too.
Right, right. And he's calling the legislature basically this derogatory term that is generally ascribed.
And every time I hear it, I'm like, okay, well, sorry, no, go ahead. They just,
That's because obviously he had that film.
So like the first time I heard it, and like it's saying you generalize, kind of going back and forth.
I don't know what I would,
And that's
it's just the way, it was very much speech, not written, was that something that when we reread wait, so that when I'm gonna reread, so I get the kind of that intonation, I can read it in a different way.
You have to get into clues. Where are they coming from? Obviously.
I think this is, I don't like an argument, how does that, there, before they read it, I might tell them, oh my
Okay, what does the reader have to bring to this text? So in a sense, I'm asking, what strategies did you have? I mean, how many people have read Stokely Carmichael's Black Power speech? Except for Cindy. Okay, so this is a new text. So what strategies did you bring to the genre of reading speech, to reading an excerpt of a speech, and to reading this particular text itself? So what did you have to do as a reader? What reader demands would play something? What did you do?
An ability to leave your own bias about like certain things behind to be able to take on the perspective of the person telling the speech, or at least understand or be open to the perspective.
Okay.
So.
I had to know what was going on in 1966.
Right, and I didn't tell you that, right? I didn't say that there was a summer of riots in Detroit and LA and Chicago, major cities, Pittsburgh at the time.
I had to reread because I didn't read the top part, so I just started reading the paragraph, and then all of a sudden I was like, wait, what's going on in this? Where is this coming from? So then I reread and then went to the top and realized, okay, now I know where we're coming from. Yeah, the speech.
I did that too, I would read it and then, that doesn't make sense, and I would reread it thinking, okay, like, in a speech way, the intonation, where would he place emphasis to get a better idea?
especially with that applause, because like that big emphasis comes right before that applause.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Okay, now I'm going to ask you to imagine, but when we talk about task demands, okay, so why are we reading this? Is it to get the gist, a quick summary? What is this about? It's about Black Power. It's about speech in 1966. Is it to do close reading? Is it to build background knowledge about something broader we're going to use later? Is it to be integrated or synthesized with other texts? Is it to challenge or corroborate another text? They could be any of these, right? So how do these then start to influence the quantitative and qualitative factors that are there, right? So I think that we really have to think about these in concert with each other when we're working with teachers and working with our own curriculum in terms of determining readability. I think less about, and I'm saying this in terms of older readers again. I think the Lexiles and some of that stuff might be important with the K through 3 readers. When we're starting to talk about the reason for stretch is we could give something, if you gave the Stokely Carmichael speech to 6th graders, they could read it, they could decode it, they probably could read the words. And if you asked them to get the gist, they probably could do it. If you asked them to do a deep, close reading and give reasons why Carmichael was angry with the establishment as a text-dependent question and having to extract that, that's a different story. If it was simply you wanted to talk more about the shifts in the civil rights movement, and you said, I just want to build your background knowledge, and we're going to talk about Black Power, and here's the original source speech where Stokely Carmichael coins the term Black Power, now what happens? How hard is that? Or if I'm supposed to corroborate this with some other text, maybe perhaps written by the Black Panther Party or something like that, in which they defined Black Power in 1968. All of these would radically impact the level of complexity of that text, not just the quantitative factor or the qualitative factors that are embedded in the text itself. So here's the news that I think we need to spread. Teachers have to read the text they're assigning. And I know in this room that sounds silly, but that's not always the case. And yet if we're really going to get at close reading with kids and anticipate the struggles they'll have with text and the ways that we can support their reading with text without giving them the answers, but still having them derive meaning from text, we have to know the text really, really well. And this is a shift then, because in the past, we always talked about matching a reader to a text, right? Let's put it in their instructional level, or their independent level, or their, right? And Common Core is saying no. Now, some of that is based on some research, and I think I talked about this already, right? Yeah. So we can see that. So we have to move that. But so now I think we really should be thinking about how are we matching strategic behaviors to the text and the task demands. So that when we talk about strategy instruction is not driven by the strategy, it's driven by the text and the task and the reader. So kind of reframing what that means for kids. And again, I'm talking about once they've learned some of these strategies. But instead of summarizing in September and organizing in October and note-taking in November, and I'll keep going, DRTA in December, it's changing on a daily basis. It's changing on a minute-by-minute basis if you're actually assembling some text sets where kids have multiple texts in front of them in a single class period. And so it depends on those. And so we have to lead with the text. That's the argument I would make. We have to lead with the text and task and not the strategy. And then knowing what we know about strategy. So we've unfortunately come to the end of our time again. On Thursday night. So before you leave, Module 3 will be due next Thursday at 11:59 p.m. I will tonight by midnight have Module 3 up and posted. Again, I apologize. I got that dropped this week. So you'll know exactly what you need to do. But we're going to stick with the blog one more module before we move to VoiceThread. So I want us to just keep going with blogging because I think it makes sense to keep learning the tool. And I will post up the strategy people, but let's just remember that on 320, we have Allison, Becky, Megan, and Lauren creating and setting purposes for reading. Okay?
I thought we were 320 as well.
Oh, yes, and Cindy, Chrissy, Katrina, and Lauren will be discussing generating student inquiry. We will have student strategy model presentation. Yes.
Does
anybody need to look at the journals?
You know what?
I wanna ask you
Sure.
if I took that.
Yeah, I will be posting, okay, yeah,
That-
I will be
Look through 'em
posting,
and coordinate copies.
I will be posting the exam online as a take home. It's really, it's, you know, like responding to 2 questions, that's it, it's not. So that will be posted though.
Find a random one, like open it.
I'm not giving people tons of time. So be checking Blackboard consistently, because now we're moving into a spring break week, and there's a long time before we meet face to face again. So, okay, so keep in contact, check your announcements in Blackboard, all that stuff. And then again, Paulina has journals if anyone wants to take one for your 505 stuff.
Yeah, that's, yeah, that's good.
How about this?
It is, but I don't have all the
Yeah,
stuff.
that's a good one.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a picture of it.
Well, you know, and make sure you write down the.
Started this week and then depending on
Yeah.
what number.
Thursday? I'm not saying, I just have to prepare both, I just need both.
I always have my son come to
No, that's what I'm saying, by midnight tonight.
It was anything that you were interested in, because all of these articles have to do with adolescents. So,